Marie-Claude Bibeau, thank you very much for coming to Radio Canada International.
It's my pleasure.
Now, your government is going to celebrate 2 years in power soon. You have been the Minister for the International Development, La Francophonie. It was a difficult file with all these international crises taking place. What do you think was your biggest accomplishment in these 2 years?
Actually, the mandate that the Prime Minister gave me was to refocus international assistance towards the poorest and the most vulnerable and to fragile states. And as you said, we're going through a period of many crises around the world. Climate change, but many conflict-affected crises. But maybe I can start with the refocusing of our policy. So to update the policy, we've been through a very important consultation, and 15,000 people participated in a way or another to this consultation in 65 countries, because it was very important to me and to our government to get the priorities of the countries where we work, and also to learn from the experience of other donor countries. So it was a very, very serious process that we've been through, and we came to the conclusion that if we want to end poverty, the best way to do it is to empower women. So this is why we have now Canadian international assistance, a feminist international assistance policy.
So let's talk about that. What does it mean, empower women? What does it mean in practical terms when you are deciding on development projects, on money that is going to be spent, how that concept gets translated into reality?
Well, we used to ask our partners to make gender-based analysis to see if their project had any impact on women in the field. But now we are asking our partners, those to whom we give money, to first consult women locally to make sure that they understand properly what their priorities are, what their needs are, what the best way are to implement a project. Second, local women, have to be part of the decision-making. And then the project has to be designed in a way that it will empower women. So women must not be seen only as beneficiaries, but as powerful agent of change, development, and peace.
Now, in situations where, such as these recent crisis in Myanmar, where we have close to 1 million refugees that have trickled out of Myanmar into Bangladesh, with majority, with over 70% women and children, what difference does that approach make there?
Well, we encourage our partners, and without earmarking our financing, because this is not what we do in a humanitarian environment. We do support the partners who are working to meet the specific needs of women. You talked about Myanmar. I learned this morning that there are more or less 20,000 women who are pregnant. There are so much gender-based violence in these crisis environment. So these women need medical services, of course, but also psychosocial services. They need family planning. They need safe sanitary installations. So all these specific needs that women have must be met and must be taken into account. And we know that they are the majority of the population in these refugee camps.
There are a number very important or very unfortunately severe crises around the world. There's the crisis in South Sudan, Yemen, that unfortunately doesn't get as much attention as other areas. How do you, as a minister or as a government, how do you decide who gets the limited number of dollars that we as Canadian taxpayers provide you with?
Well, we work with those partners who have the ability to work in these very difficult environment, because we know that it's more and more difficult to have access for humanitarian and to provide humanitarian assistance. So we work with them to figure what the needs are and how Canada can have the biggest impact. And we kind of have our fair share of contribution in these environments. So this is we try to distribute the amount of money that we have. And if we talk about really humanitarian assistance, Canada gives more or less $800 million per year to humanitarian assistance. So we try to go where the crises are the worst, where our partners, trusted partners, are in the position to provide services and to do our fair share.
Now, what happens in situations where there is a sudden crisis? Because most of the time we know there is a situation developing, we know that we can foresee a need. What happens in cases where there are natural disasters and you've already allocated a certain amount of money? You as a minister, how does it work? Do you go to the cabinet and say, well, this happened in Puerto Rico, or in we have the crisis in Bangladesh, I need more money?
Actually, there's two different mechanisms. So the first one is we give money to some of these major partners who are the first one to be there when natural disasters happen. For example, the Red Cross. So we give every year a certain amount of money to the International Red Cross. So when a natural disaster happens, for example, they already have Canadian money in bank so that they can react quickly the same day. As soon as they can get there, they already have Canadian money in bank to react. Second, we have what we call the crisis pool. So this is a special fund that I have access to with the authorization of myself, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Finance, and Prime Minister. So there are the four of us that can to access the crisis pool, and this can now be done in a couple of days. So it could be very quick.
Can you?
And actually, we even have, I just said quick, so it made me think that even we have a quick, more rapid mechanism, which is called the quick release mechanism, which I have access to alone.
So do you have an example that you have had to use this mechanism for recently?
Actually, in Myanmar, I just announced last week an additional $12 million, which brings our Canadian contribution to Myanmar this year to $25 million. And I used the crisis pool because what's going on in Myanmar, well, in Bangladesh right now, with 900,000 refugees within 2 months is considered as a special situation, and I did used the crisis pool for that.
Your government has also appointed Bob Rae as the envoy to Myanmar to, try to communicate Canada's position more strongly. What are you planning to do with that file? It's a very interesting situation where you have a civilian leader who's an honorary citizen of Canada, who might not be in full control of the military resources that are being brought to bear on these refugees. You have an insurgency going on there as well, which complicates the situation. How do you, as a minister looking in this situation, decide what you do?
Actually, the Prime Minister himself got involved in the situation. He had a conversation. He wrote a letter to Aung San Suu Kyi. The Minister of Foreign Affairs is also directly involved in that conversation with the military general. You're right, Aung San Suu Kyi doesn't have the full power over this government. So our special envoy will push forward the position of Canada, will investigate, will have a close look, will be in the field to see what's happening. We will see how Canada can do to support the recommendation that have been made within the report of Kofi Annan, for example. So these are being there in the field with the experience of Mr. Ray, we hope that we will be able to push forward the implementation of this report.
Now, in a couple of weeks, in November, Canada is going to host the ministerial meeting on peacekeeping in Vancouver. I don't know if you can make any predictions, but should we expect a major peacekeeping announcement there?
I cannot talk about it directly, but what I can tell you is that we are almost done with the review of the Women, Peace and Security Policy, which is related to the Resolution 1325 of the United Nations. So we are working, Minister Sajan and myself and Minister Freeland, on this Women, Peace and Security new policy, which involve more participation of Canadian peacekeepers and Canadian women police officers, but also finding ways to have more women within the peacekeepers of the different countries. So training them, for example, and making sure that these women and men who are peacekeepers coming from different countries are well trained to face and to act and to behave in front of gender-based violence survivors, for example. This is something that we are looking at carefully. It's also important to have more women in the peacekeeping forces because these women can get a different type of information from the field and understand differently, which is complementary to the man, what's going on in the field and how we should react and what we can do to improve the situation. We also want to promote the presence of women around peacekeeping negotiation process table. So we are all working together to improve our Canadian participation towards the contribution of women in peace, security, and through the peacekeepers, amongst others.
My last question. You are one of the, I think, best traveled international development ministers, at least in my recent memory. I don't remember other ministers traveling as much as you do. What has been the spot that touched you the most?
I started my career in international development, so I was used to development and to poverty. But since I'm a minister, I've visited many refugee camps in Iraq, Jordan, South Sudan, DRC, shortly in Bangladesh. This is different. This is hard. I always have one-on-one conversation with with sexual violence survivor. These discussions are always very hard because rape, as we define it here in Canada, is not what it is in these countries. They use the body of a woman to destroy a whole community. It's much more violent. It's really hard. But in the same time, these women always spend more time thanking me, thanking Canada for what we're doing for them, to give them a second chance in life than the time they take to tell me what they've been going through. And I also want to say that humanitarian workers are my heroes because they work in very difficult environment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.